on 6th Avenue entrance. So hope to see you there. So now I would love to invite our speaker for today, Pastor Alison. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Thank you, Nara. Good morning, everyone. It's so good to be here with you. As Nara mentioned, my name is Alison. I'm the lead pastor here at the River. Welcome to all of you who are physically here in the room. Hello, good to see you. And also welcome to those of you who are tuning in via live stream. It's so good to be here with you. So we're currently in a sermon series called Cultivating Fruits of the Spirit. We're considering the concept of spiritual growth by delving into each of the fruits of the Spirit listed in Paul's letter to the Galatians. Over the past few weeks, we've explored an introductory framework as well as the fruits of love, joy, patience, and peace. And today I'm going to share a message about generosity. So what exactly do we mean when we use the word generosity? Merriam-Webster defines generosity in a number of ways. One definition is about being charitable, giving or sharing liberally. We use the word this way when we talk about people being generous with their time or their resources, when they give a generous gift, or if they're a generous benefactor. Another meaning of generosity is being plentiful, being more than enough. An example of this is when we talk about a generous serving of food, something larger or more abundant than needed or expected. A third way that we use the word is when we talk about reading or interpreting something generously. By this we mean being charitable in our assessment of someone's actions or motives, pausing to consider that there may be factors driving someone's words or behavior that we aren't aware of or don't completely understand. That perhaps we are experiencing someone in their worst moment, or they are doing the best they can given their limitations. So with all of these uses of generosity, there is a sense of unexpected or out of the ordinary abundance, and a freely given, warm-hearted concern for others. One framing of generosity that I find particularly thought-provoking comes from a passage in the book of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 15:7-8 says, "If there is among you anyone in need, a member of your community in any of your towns within the land that the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward your needy neighbor. You should rather open your hand, willingly lending enough to meet the need, whatever it may be." What interesting language. Hard-hearted and tight-fisted versus soft-hearted and open-handed. When I think of the word hard-hearted, I picture a heart encased in armor. Armor does a great job of providing protection, but it can also lead to disconnection, preventing love and care from getting in or getting out. It's a lonely image, and also one that I find very relatable. Whether out of fear or out of pain, we've all hidden behind emotional armor at one time or another. And then there's this alternative picture of a softer heart and open hands, where there's greater opportunity for joy and connection, to reach out to others and to be reached out to in return. However, at the same time, there is less self-protection and this greater openness to hurt or to harm. Some of you know that I am a big reader. And actually, when I first moved to New York, before changing careers, becoming a pastor and a therapist, I worked in the marketing department for a children's book publisher. I still really love children's books, and as I was working on this sermon and thinking about generosity, a couple children's books came to mind. One of them was The Rainbow Fish by Marcus Pfister. Have any of you read this book before? Yeah, okay, a mix, some yes, some no. So as a kid, I loved this book so much. I think some of what I loved about it was that there's this special iridescent effect on many of the fish scales, and it's just incredibly beautiful. But now, as I revisit this book as an adult, I have some mixed feelings about the story. So for those of you who haven't read it before, let me give you a quick summary. So there was this fish who was the most beautiful fish in the sea, and the other fish called him the rainbow fish. The rainbow fish was very proud of his shimmery scales and ignored invitations to come and play with the other fish. Was he just shy and introverted, or did he view himself as superior? It's unclear. One day, a little blue fish approached the rainbow fish and tried to convince him to give away one of his shimmery scales. The little blue fish said, "They are so wonderful, and you have so many." What do you think? Reasonable request or a little invasive and entitled? The rainbow fish was appalled by the little blue fish's request and snapped at him to get away. Shocked and upset, the little blue fish went to tell all the other fish what had happened, and from there, all the fish proceeded to shun and ignore the rainbow fish. After this, the rainbow fish became very lonely and wondered, why does nobody like me? Surely my beauty should have won me some admirers. Eventually, the rainbow fish encountered the wise octopus, who advised him to give a glittering scale to each of the other fish. The wise octopus said, "You will no longer be the most beautiful fish in the sea, but you will discover how to be happy." And although he was initially reluctant, the rainbow fish did as the wise octopus advised. He gave a shimmery scale to each of the other fish, and as a result, he made a ton of fish friends and discovered the true source of happiness, generosity, and belonging. The end. Okay, so there's some stuff I really like here in this story. I like the message that friendship, connection, belonging, generosity can be more enduring sources of joy than possessions or external beauty. However, there are also a number of things that trouble me. I don't love that the rainbow fish was shunned for initially refusing to give up a literal piece of himself. I'm uncomfortable with the implication that friendship needs to be won through gifts. And I'm saddened that the rainbow fish had to make himself less special or less impressive in order to belong. Is this rainbow fish depiction of generosity what we should be striving for? Playwright and screenwriter Topher Payne would say no. As a part of a fundraiser for the Atlanta Artist Relief Fund, Payne created a series called Topher Fixed It, where he created what he called parody alternate endings to beloved but problematic children's literature. So, the rainbow fish became The Rainbow Fish Keeps His Scales. And on the parody cover, you can see a speech bubble that says, "I won't diminish myself for the comfort of others." Another title included in Topher Fixed It is a parody of The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. The Giving Tree became The Tree Who Set Healthy Boundaries. And on the parody cover, you can see a speech bubble that just says no. I highly recommend checking out Payne's parody versions of these and a couple other children's books. They're really thought-provoking, and they expose the way that societal messaging around generosity is confusing and at times problematic. Both The Rainbow Fish and The Giving Tree would lead us to believe that we should strive to be generous no matter the cost to our own well-being. That we should always say yes to helping others no matter what. But the problem is that pursuing generosity in this way is unsustainable. If we give in this way, over time, we will inevitably become burnt out, angry, and resentful, unable to embody the freedom and warm-heartedness that true generosity entails. So how should we pursue generosity? How can we remain soft-hearted and open-handed? If it's not through sheer willpower or by saying yes to every request, then how do we cultivate these qualities in our lives? When it comes to these questions, I believe that shame and vulnerability researcher Brené Brown has some interesting advice for us. Brown and her team spent years studying compassionate, generous people. Going in, Brown's hypothesis was that what compassionate, generous people have in common is faith or spirituality. But the pattern in the research data showed something else. Brown discovered that what compassionate, generous people actually have in common is boundaries. They respect other people's boundaries, and they're very clear about identifying, communicating, and enforcing their own. In Brown's own words, they assume that other people are doing the best they can, but they also ask for what they need, and they don't put up with a lot of shit. Brown defines boundaries in a couple of ways. The first is boundaries are what's okay and what's not okay. So what am I okay with? What allows me to live in integrity with my values? And what am I not okay with? What prevents me from living in integrity with my values? And then borrowing from Prentice Hemphill, the second way that Brown defines boundaries is boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So in other words, how do I actually live out Jesus' greatest commandment to love your neighbor as yourself? How do I go about loving my neighbor and loving myself at the same time? These definitions may sound simple, but in practice, they ask a lot of us. First, we must know ourselves, what we're okay with, what we're not okay with, what values we want to guide our lives, what helps us in any given moment to be our best selves, what things need to be in place so that we can love ourselves and love others well. Second, we must take steps to communicate and enforce our boundaries. And depending on how much experience we have doing this and how people respond to the boundaries that we set, this can be incredibly hard. We may have to live with the discomfort of people being disappointed with us, not liking us, being angry with us, or we may have to grieve the ways that people are unable to give us what we hoped that they would be able to. I don't know about all of you, but I really, really hate it when people are disappointed in me or angry with me. But like Brown, I've seen how letting our fear of these things rule us can lead us to saying yes to things that we really do not have the bandwidth for or that do not actually align with our values. And how, when we do this, we can quickly find ourselves caught up in anger, resentment, and judgment, unable to be compassionate or generous to anyone at all. Jesus himself warned us about this. In the book of Matthew, Jesus said, "Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one." So essentially, only say yes when you mean to say yes, and only say no when you mean to say no. Another reason that practicing boundaries can be challenging is because it's all too easy to unintentionally become self-righteous, to become what Brown calls a boundary bully, someone who uses boundaries as a weapon to judge or to look down upon others. It's especially easy to do this when we're first learning how to set boundaries. But we must remember that the reason that we should pursue boundaries is not to prove our own righteousness or that our way of life is superior. The reason we should pursue boundaries is to give ourselves greater capacity to practice things like love, compassion, generosity, both for ourselves and for others. Boundaries are what help us to live out of a place of freedom, to be able to release our death grip on any number of things, our time, our resources, our own sense of righteousness, and open our hands instead. Being open-handed does not mean that we automatically say yes or give what we are holding away, but it does mean that we are more able to make purposeful choices about how we want to be compassionate and generous. That there's more room to consider, both for ourselves and for our neighbors, what will bring love, what will bring joy, what will bring life. To be intentional about what we hold on to and what we release. So throughout this series, we've been ending each sermon with a time of processing and engaging. And each week, this has looked a little bit different. So for today, I've prepared some reflection questions to help us think about how boundaries can help us to engage with others more generously. So in a few minutes, worksheets with the questions will be passed around the room. And for those tuning in via live stream, we'll also share the questions on the screen. But before we jump in, I want to tell you a bit about the context behind some of these reflection questions. So when conducting research on compassion and generosity, Brown would ask her research participants, do you think, in general, that people are doing the best they can? What she found was, pretty consistently, that the results are pretty much 50-50. Half of people think probably yes, and half of people think absolutely not. Those who answer yes are a bit cautious about their response. They say things like, I know it sounds naive, I can't be sure, but I think so, I know it sounds weird or dumb. They often qualify their answer by saying, it doesn't mean that people can't grow or change. However, in general, they tend to believe that people are doing the best they can with the tools that they have. On the other hand, those who answer no tend to be emphatic and respond without hesitation. And what's fascinating is that unlike their yes counterparts, about 80% of the no respondents use themselves as an example. They say things like, I know I'm not always doing my best, so why should I assume that others are? These folks have a tendency to be really hard on themselves and hard on others. They're often people who struggle with perfectionism. In comparison, the yes respondents are more likely to be vulnerable, to believe in their own self-worth, and to be generous with themselves. They too offer examples of situations where they made mistakes or didn't show up as their best selves, but rather than pointing out how they could and should have done better, they explained that while falling short, their intentions were good and they were trying. This outlook shaped both how they viewed themselves and how they viewed others. I think this connection between self-compassion and compassion for others, or generosity for self and generosity for others, to be pretty profound. It makes me think about the ways that practicing compassion and generosity for myself can actually help me to love others more deeply, and vice versa. So after asking that initial question, Brown took the thought experiment a step further. She asked research participants to think of someone they find themselves judging and holding resentment toward, and to write that person's name on a piece of paper. Then she said something like, pretend with me for a minute. What if you had it on the highest authority, say from God, that the person whose name you wrote down is doing the very best they can do? would that change anything about how you think or feel or engage with this person? Oftentimes, when the participants allowed themselves to think this way, to believe that the person was doing the best they could do, they found themselves moved to tears. And they realized ways that they might need to let go of judgment or adjust their expectations or grieve hopes that they'd been holding on to, or change the kind of support they were offering to avoid feeling angry or resentful. Believing that someone is doing the best that they can is not the same thing as saying that what they are doing is good. But it does allow us to move through the world with less reactivity, anger, and resentment, to be more strategic about the ways that we protect ourselves, and sometimes, after we have grieved properly, to be able to appreciate what it is that people are actually able to offer us, even if their limitations mean that it's different from what we'd initially hoped for. So today, during our reflection time, I want us to consider some reflection questions related to boundaries and compassion, and also to explore this thought exercise. So we'll spend about 7 minutes engaging in this time of reflection and prayer, and then we'll come back together for some musical worship. So as we transition into this reflection time, let me read you a poem by Erin Hansen. I was the type of person that held on to things too tight, unable to release my grip when it no longer felt right. And although it gave me blisters and my fingers would all ache, I always thought that holding on was worth the pain it takes. I used to think in losing things, I'd lose part of me too, that slowly I'd become someone my heart no longer knew. Then one day something happened. I dropped what I had once held dear, but my soul became much lighter instead of filled with fear. And it taught my heart that some things aren't meant to last for long. They arrive to teach you lessons and then continue on. You don't have to cling to people who no longer make you smile or do something you've come to hate if it isn't worth your while. That sometimes the thing you're fighting for isn't worth the cost, and not everything you ever lose is bound to be a loss. All right, let's take some time to reflect.
take a few moments to finish with our reflections. All right. Thank you, Alison, for the message. In just a moment, we're going to continue on with musical worship. But one option we actually do have during this time is you can receive